This is the biggest protest that we had at least since 43 years ago. They are looking for freedom, they are looking for dignity. They see the regime as a terrorist which doesn't have any moral principles and wants to make an Islamic world, not just an Islamic Iran. They use physical torture, psychological torture, and even sexual torture. Some reports from inside the detention centers that they raped women, men, and children. We don't need to look for suicide bomb to understand that there is a terrorist group in a country. If America wants to have a deal with the regime, it means that they are fighting against the people of Iran, and they mustn't do it.
The Iranian regime is facing the most serious uprising in decades. Widespread protests erupted after a young woman died while being held by the country's morality police in September, and the protests have been continuing. A human rights group estimates that hundreds have been killed as the Iranian ruler cracks down on the protests. Mary Mohammadi is a Christian and a human rights activist from Iran. She was detained there several times herself for her human rights work. I'm Steve Lance, filling in for Paul Graney this week. Mary Mohammadi, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Mary, right now we're seeing a lot of civil unrest, what some might refer to as protests inside of Iran. If you could give us a little bit of background as to what is happening there.
I would like to give you a quick summary that what happened in Iran. Since the revolution in 1979, many people and many political groups who were already fighting against the previous regime, they knew that the Islamic Republic is not a good alternative, and they kept fighting against the regime, but the regime suppressed all of them severely. After a while, because the pressure was not just on political activists and not just on the opposition, even on ordinary people, the regime knew if they want to keep on in this way, they cannot stay in power for many years. So they decided to deceive the people in many ways. One of them was reformism. They claimed that maybe if we reform, maybe the regime will grant a little bit freedom to the people. But from the beginning, it was obvious that it's not possible, because we don't need to experience everything in our country. We can learn from the history. And religious systems and also ideological systems cannot be reformed at all. And for example, Christian system in Europe centuries ago, we have this experience in the history, and also Zoroastrian system in Iran before Islam, more than 1,000 years ago, we have this experience too, and also ideological system in China, in Cuba, in North Korea, all of them prove that it's not possible. And there were some people and political activists, and even some of the family members of the authorities in the regime knew that it's just a scheme to deceive the people to stay in power more. But because they didn't have platform and they couldn't talk about it in public, and many of them were killed from the beginning. And so the regime could keep going on this way for many years. But fortunately, since roughly 5 years ago, in 2017, the majority of people protested, and it was a nationwide protest that they shouted that we don't hope anymore to reform the regime. And also, I want to emphasize that before that, many people knew that it's not possible to reform the regime, but they didn't have platform because the most of journalists and media were under the pressure and not under pressure. They were reformists. And so there was no platform, no space to talk for the people who were against this thoughts. And also we had many protests in these 5 years. But this protest that I would like to call it revolution, because the people call it revolution. This is the biggest protest that we had at least since 43 years ago. And the people are more united, and the people are more mature and more aware. And because in these 43 years ago, the regime has used all tactics to deceive the people can predict that what is the next step of the regime. And so the regime, I think it is at the end of the path, and it's really close to be fallen.
You call it a revolution. If you could tell us what is triggering this revolution. There was a young lady, I believe she was killed there. She may have been of Kurdish. And if you could tell us if there's any significance in that as well.
She was Iranian Kurdish woman, and it is very important because, as I said from the beginning, many people knew that the Islamic Republic is actually a terrorist group, not a legitimate regime, and they never give up. And so one of them was Kurdish people, and that's why Kurdish people were under pressure and were suppressed by the regime, and many of them were executed. And they experienced and suffered many forms of persecution. Women also were suppressed by the regime, but on the other hand, they never give up, and they keep fighting against the regime. The murder of Mahsa Amini as a Iranian Kurdish woman could connect these two groups were fighting against the regime from the beginning, and they were suppressed by the regime. And it could make incredible union between the people, and it could make a nationwide and popular and spontaneous protest that we witnessed these months.
And to your point, the Iranian regime has tried to separate and persecute people based on ethnicity in the past, yet you're seeing people from all different ethnic groups in Iran coming together. Is that significant right now?
Not just in the past, even until now, the regime is dividing the people not just by their ethnic identity, even by their religious identity, by their sexual identity. And imagine when you are under pressure, when you are suppressed by the regime, and you want to stand against the regime, and you are looking for freedom. One of the next steps that you must do it is looking for allies, and because it's really hard to fight against a regime alone. But the regime used terrible labels on each all groups actually in Iran. And so when you are looking for allies, you cannot find any group. And you feel that you are alone. The regime wanted to create pessimism and also make you depressed, make you weak. I actually give you the weak feeling, and also they want to make you inactive from the beginning. And but now, because after many years, the people, because they are living together, and gradually they can be familiar more with each other, and they can understand that it's not true. These are just some wrong labels, and now they know that the most important reason for their problems is the regime, and now they know that if they don't be united together, they cannot defeat the main enemy.